Things are changing when it comes to Star Wars ships. New lore has been introduced, and there are some surprising differences from Star Wars Legends that I think are worth discussing. We'll cover that and more on today's Star Wars video. So, Star Wars just released a new reference book, and in my opinion, this is something Disney has really been missing out on. Star Wars Legends, especially the late Legends era, did really good with reference books. We had things like The Essential Guide to Warfare, which not only summed up what happened in the movies, which is what a lot of the reference books do now, but also just made connections that didn't already exist, cleaned up the lore, and just generally were a ton of fun to read, even if you were really familiar with all the source material. And one of the cool things about, say, the Essential Guide to Warfare, the new Essential Guide to Vehicles and Vessels, all of those things, is that they did a great job of covering in depth, not just the movies, but also the secondary material. That's something the new canon has really failed at, but the Dawn of the Rebellion visual guide, I think, does a good job of making some inroads. It covers, as you might expect based on the name, the Rebellion era stories of the Star Wars universe, including Andor, the Jedi series, Star Wars Rebels, and more. I'm having a good time reading the book. I recommend you pick it up yourself, but I also thought that I would share a few interesting things that I noticed. And I want to move right to the page on Imperial Star Destroyers. In Star Wars Legends, the Imperial was actually a Clone Wars design. Back then, it was called the Imperator. There were a few in existence during the late stages of the Clone Wars. Some fought at the Battle of Coruscant, for example. That is actually explicitly changed by this source book, which says, and I quote, "Upon Palpatine's declaration of the First Galactic Empire, work immediately begins on the warship that will embody this bold new era." I do think that was generally the approach that the new canon lore had been taking, and to be honest, even in Star Wars Legends, although you hear that the Imperator was active in the Clone Wars, it's not something you really see outside some small references in, for example, the Republic Commando novels. I do think the section on the Imperial Star Destroyer is nice. One thing that I noticed is that they sort of address whether the things are meant to be shield bulbs or sensor domes by calling it multi-purpose geodesic sensor domes, showing that, hey, that's at least one of their purposes, but not closing off the fact that they could also be projecting shields. I think one of the main confusions regarding this point has to come in Return of the Jedi. I mean, they destroy one of the balls and the Imperial officer literally says, "We've lost our bridge to deflector shields." Other than that, I mean, much of the lore is kind of as we expected. They do also give precise measurements for the Imperial Star Destroyer, which I'm sure will help people when it comes to fighting over the lengths of ships online. One aspect that I really like too, just a small little Easter egg, is that Walex Blissix, who is like the guy, the ship designer, is now given the middle name Cantwell. For those who don't know, Colin Cantwell was an early Star Wars artist. He designed what would become the Arrestor cruiser, but was initially an option for the Imperial Star Destroyer. So his sort of legacy as one of the forefathers of Star Wars design has now been incorporated in this character, who is the designer of many Imperial vessels. Another point of clarification that the book makes in regards to vehicles is the Imperial Walker section. For a while, there's been this sort of weird thing where there are two models of Galactic Civil War era walkers. There's an older version and a smaller, newer version, which is more famous. The one we see, for example, in episode 5, well, they go a pretty boring route and simply call the taller Rebel-style walker the AT-ATP, with the P, of course, standing for prototype. I will say, though, even in these sections, I would have liked more new information because it's sort of what's appeared in, for example, the Rogue One visual guide, and I think the best example of this would be the section on Rebel ships. The MC-75, for example, it's all information we've seen before. Looking at the other ships, I will say one interesting detail is that the Pelta class actually apparently dates back to the High Republic, which I was surprised by because I wouldn't say it necessarily matches the High Republic's design language. But I mean, the Braha Talk, the Corellian Corvette, it's all stuff that I would have explained to you in a basic 2-minute primer on the ship. And that's what's disappointing about these source books. Even though I applaud them for, actually making something not based on movies, it's still disappointing that they don't actually create new lore. They don't design new ships or incorporate things from Star Wars Legends or even the novels. Like, this is meant to be a Pablo Hidalgo work. It is supposed to involve the Star Wars story crew, when this is really something anyone who'd watched the movies and read the prior books could mostly put together. Again, there are some exceptions to this, like the Verpine, for example, are now said to play a key role in the creation of the full production model B-Wing, which, as a Legends fan who liked the Verpine as a species, I'm happy with that. It's a cool way to integrate what we saw in Star Wars Rebels with Quarry, with everything that happened between that point and Return of the Jedi. I think the biggest changes in the lore, though, come in sections which haven't already been served by source books. One really big one that I noticed when reading through things is that Omega, despite generally being called an unmodified clone, is explicitly said to have been altered by Kaminoan scientist Nala Se. So that seems to me to be a change in the lore. Another little note I really like comes from the Tatooine section. Kenobi obviously hasn't really received a ton of reference book coverage. They allude to creatures far larger than even crate dragons living within the depths of Tatooine's desert. Obviously, we do see that they're chopping up that weird sandfish thing, but I just thought that was a fun little addition. I also found it interesting how Beru is given sort of a more complex backstory as well, where it says she secretly helped deprogram transmitter chips as part of a network that freed enslaved people on Tatooine, something she stopped after making Luke her priority. That lore may have already existed, but I wasn't aware of it, so that's kind of nice. That is, however, some of the interesting stuff that I picked out based on my first reading of the reference book. Maybe you'll find more. I guess earlier on I recommended it, and I think I still would if you are someone who likes to collect Star Wars books, but if you are looking for like a ton of new lore and not just like the exact height of various Star Wars characters, maybe this is not the one for you. But again, I think your mileage will vary. Let me know, what's your favorite Star Wars reference book of all time? What's your favorite new canon reference book? I look forward to reading all your comments down below. Until next time, guys, be safe, have a good one, and may the Force be with you.